Welcome to one more edition of Politics Done Right. Folks across the country, calls are rising to defund the police, but a push to divest resources from law enforcement is nothing new to Dr. Paul Van Buskirk. He was director of the Model Cities program and Element President Johnson's War on Poverty. And he says not much has changed in 52 years. Dr. Van Buskirk, how are you doing today? Welcome to Politics Done Right.
Well, thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Yeah, look, I got this notice that about you. I must admit that I hadn't heard about you before. When I saw that, I'm like, just in time, defund the police, police brutality. All these things are now center stage in America. It has always been, but it's getting attention now. What say you?
Yes, there's I'm going to go back to the riots of '68 and what transpired at that particular time, and in the inner cities, and what were the problems at that time. They did a Kerner report, was a commission to determine what were the problems in the inner cities, in the inner city communities, and the Black communities. And they concluded that one of the key problems was unemployment. There was vast unemployment. And that time, it was difficult to get a job. The economy wasn't like it has been recently in terms of job opportunities. So what happened if you were Black and you were in the inner cities and you're told that there's no job opportunities, you're unemployed, and that's the way it's going to be. And that's the way it's going to be the rest of your life. And then the second item was the schools, the poor schools, and the poor education that children were getting. And then the third item was police brutality, high crimes, and safety within their community. You know, that children could safely go to school and their streets would be safe. And then there was a lot of systemic racism in the country at that time, particularly in the South. The schools were segregated, but also there was the flight to the suburbs. The whites were fleeing to the suburbs, and there was discrimination in housing that the Blacks couldn't flee to the suburbs. And then there's legislation passed for that particular discriminatory practice. But if we go forward, 52 years forward, there's been a lot of progress for Blacks in America in terms, we have Black generals, we had a Black president, we had Black Secretary of State, Black Attorney General, we had Black CEOs. But nothing's changed in the inner city. It's the same problem as it was 52 years ago. It's the problem, again, of poor education, poor educational facilities. It's a problem of, still we have brutality in the police department, even though we've had some reforms. And it's job opportunities that they can't get firms to move into the inner cities to provide for job opportunities. So basically, if you look at the inner cities, in 52 years, not much has changed. Now, what's happened today in 2020 is in those 52 years, people accepted the fact that, we're going to have poor education for our children. They call that apathy. But then that apathy turns into action. And today what it did, it turned into action with the national protest units. Also turned into violent actions in terms of the arson and the looting and what have you. But I separate them out from the
I want to ask you two questions. I want to interrupt you a second. Because you went over quite a bit there. You talked about having a Black president, a Black general, and all these issues, which are true. And you talk about a lot of problems deep within the inner city, which are actually true as well. But do you also see, let's say the inner city, I don't know what percentage of, let's say, Black people of color live there. I imagine it would be on the order of 30-something% or whatever. Do you see the problem being systemic, a continual systemic problem with racism that not only holds back the inner city, but in that it holds back those people of color outside of the inner cities? That as a Black man myself, I still get an apple in my throat when a cop is behind me. I'm a professional. I still get that. Don't you think that there is something else that needs to change within this society that will ultimately migrate to the inner city as well?
Yeah, there's, that's a big question too. And you're talking about changing the cultural norms of a
Right.
society. How do we do that? You know, I think we're making some progress. One, by profiling the problem.
Right.
Profile it, and then we can start to understand it, and then we can address it. There's a lot of other problems that are taking place here in the inner cities that are different from that. I'd like to talk about a little bit.
Sure.
If you talk, let's take Minneapolis. That's been the epicenter. Let's take the chief of police. He's black. He's a reformer. He's trying to reform his police force. The people in the inner cities got to have confidence in their police force, obviously, in order to eliminate these problems. And then you have this Derek Chevin, who has somewhere in the order of 18 citations for misconduct, some which are physical. That chief police knows that. He's got an officer with that many citations. He's aware of that person's there. But he can't remove them. Why can't he remove them? Because of the power structure, the political power structure, the political establishment, the mayor and the consul have made an agreement, entered an agreement, a contract with the police unions and incorporate policies that make it impossible for him to remove that man. So what happens then? Well, the people in that community, they know he's a racist. And they go to the chief and they complain, you got to get rid of this man. He says, I can't get rid of him. And they say, what are you telling us? There's nothing you can do. He said, that's right. There's nothing I can do. Well, here we go back again. There's nothing you can do. You got to live with this. So those barriers have got to be broken down as well, so that that chief police can able to get rid of those bad apples.
Let me interject here, Doctor. Because I think you are the one that can answer a question like this. The reason why the chief who runs the police department can do nothing about it, it's because the political leaders won't give him the wherewithal, including during contract negotiations, to have the power to do so. And the reason they don't give him that authority and give the unions that authority is that the unions have a way of getting to a particular sect of people so that they can use the law and order argument against those people who the police departments are seen responsible to police, that being people of color. We have to have power within the department that can continue to suppress those people that we have been designed to have a fear for. Your thoughts on that, if you agree with that?
Oh, I agree with you. And it's power, it's political power. And you got to get political power back into the hands of the people. That's what you got to do. You know, and that's done by the people within that community, you know, taking the destiny in their own hands, so to speak, and to organize and then to address those problems.
I love that. Yes.
And that's what it, you know, in my experience in Model Cities program is the same thing. We had to incorporate all those people that are living, you know, within those inner cities with all the problems of be it the police or poverty or education or job. You got to bring them into the decision-making process. They're going to tell you what the problem is. You know, I can sympathize with their problem, but I don't live their problem. And they can tell you what the problem is. And in the decision-making process, I've found that once they can identify and quantify the problem and then develop strategies, solutions to address that problem, you know, they're all moving in the same direction now. And then they have some political power. Now, with the unions, they have political power too because they have money. You know, they give contributions to the political power players. Where the people in the community aren't organized, you know, and they aren't organized. And also, not only do they give money, but they also have a voting block as well that they give. and they have to organize and have to, you know, exert their political muscle as well to counter that. You know? So.
Now, I tell you, you make a very important point where you say that people have to organize. And what I've seen recently is that we've been organizing, and I see a sort of a flashpoint that has occurred, and that is around this term, defund the police. And ironically, what has happened as well is this move against this whole order has become very multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multi-age, that I think speaks to what you just spoke about, which is the people organizing. How can they do so with that moniker, defund the police, in your opinion?
Well, the important thing is they're profiling the problem. And then we got to profile the solution too as well. You know, right now, to defund the police is kind of just a generic term. It's very
Right.
general. We don't have specificity in that.
Right.
In that. Excuse me. in order to do that, now we have to really kind of do is to what I call document the problem. So everybody, there's no question about what the problem is. It's well documented, and then we have to do is determine the strategies and solutions to address that problem. And I think about Ray Kelly. He was a police commissioner in New York City under Mayor Bloomberg, and he had a 63% approval rating from the Black community. He spent a lot of time just walking in the Black community, talking to people in the Black community, and I think what happened, and I can only speculate here, but if I talk to the people in the Black community, the mothers, their children are going to school, you know, the father's looking for a job, and ask them what they want. What does that mean, defunding the police? What does that mean to you? I think they would say they want law enforcement, they want safety, but they also want to have confidence in their police that are carrying out those duties as well. I think what Ray recommended, and I think they would think, is one, they should have intense psychological testing of new recruits. That was one thing that he offered. The second thing he was offered, it was the problem with the unions in terms of not be able to get rid of the bad apples. And he also said in New York with the Civil Service Commission, he get rid of them, Civil Service Commission reinstate them. So he said that problem had to be addressed. The third one, he said, is he thinks that they should be college graduates because they're more sympathetic to the problems of racial discrimination. And right now, I guess in New York City, more than 50% of their members are minority, members of the minority community. And now they have to be a high school graduate, and they have to have 60 hours of college credit, which is normally the junior college law enforcement program. Now, in order for that to happen in the inner cities, you know, we had to have a decent education for the children in that district. And we have what we call choice, where they have charter schools as an alternative. The problem is the political establishment's against that. So those barriers have to be broken down. But I think we have to go into the inner cities. We have to talk to those people and determine what's their interpretation of that. What's their meaning, and how do they see that and want to address that, and how do they see the future in terms of actually solving that problem, their problems.
Now, it's interesting because we just had another police shooting in Atlanta yesterday or Friday night. And this is sort of an offside from the complete premise of the discussion here. But don't it surprise you that after the killing of Chauvin in Minnesota, killing that on Floyd by Chauvin in Minnesota, that police officers would be more hesitant in a nonviolent confrontation with a suspect, if you will, and not use deadly force? If you weren't of the mindset that nothing's going to happen, wouldn't you say, didn't you find that pretty strange?
Absolutely. In fact, it's almost unbelievable. You know, if I was a police officer and I was trying to arrest a black person and he ran away from me, the last thing I would do is shoot him. And I'd let him run, you know.
it is amazing that the sensitivity to the times, all of that was disregarded. But anyhow, Doctor, you were talking about, you worked on the Model Cities program. Right now, one of the issues that people talk about all the time is, where is the money going to come from? And I'm a political activist. I'm also a progressive person. And we all think, or we all know, the money's out there. The money is out there. However, the way it's apportioned, the way it's taxed, the way it's allowed to grow, the way the system works on who profits on what is actually an issue. I don't know if that is within your purview or not, but I'd like to talk a little bit about that before we get into your book, which I just noticed you have a new book out. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts on funding and the way our economic system in general apportions the spoils.
Well, just really briefly, the economic system in terms of apportioning the revenue is the wheel that squeaks the most gets the grease.
Terrible.
I think that sums it up.
Yes, yes.
To be honest with you, if you got a strong lobby and you got a lot of money, you can make things happen. Yeah, you're right. The money's there. It's just a question of is the commitment there?
Right.
That's what we need is the commitment. We can identify the problems, we can identify the solutions and the strategies, but we need the resources to make that work. And those resources have to come from both the public and the private sector. Particularly the private sector in terms of firms willing to relocate in the inner cities to provide job opportunities. Also, you're supporting alternate schools for opportunities for Black mothers that have their children get a safe and decent education. But the revenue is there. It's just a question of political commitment.
What is very interesting is that I think this pandemic showed something in the early days, in the days before I became a full-time activist. I always talked about my garbage man having a lot more worth than my stockbroker. And it was interesting because people would laugh at that when you make a statement like that. And now with this pandemic occurring, the people that they most want to see is that grocery store open with cashiers, that delivery person coming to their doors with their food that they're not willing to go eat at the restaurants, or that they can't go eat at the restaurants. The doctors, we're really seeing the worth right now. And in seeing that worth, we're seeing how much within the inner city, which you are well apt at, how much those people in the inner cities who still have to go out to work because those are the jobs many of them do, what their real worth is to society, which should justify, in my opinion, you tell me otherwise, much more investments in the inner city. And it's not a gift. They are holding up this economy.
Yeah, historically, the investments were in the inner city, going back historically in our country, because that's where the labor force was.
Right.
And that's where you had, Ford plants were in the middle of the cities, and in my community, the textile plants were in the middle of the cities because that's where the labor was, But you're right, there, we have now the opportunity zones, and hopefully that will create some investment into the inner cities and develop some firms and industry to create jobs. Now, I'm just going to tell you a little problem about that. You got Walmart in Chicago.
Right.
Chicago. Walmart, in order to get approval from the city to put the store in there, they had to pay off the unions to get in there.
Yes.
So who wants to move to an inner city when they got to pay the unions off to get in there? That's corruption in itself. You should be trying to entice them to come in. You should be offering things for them to come into the community. So we got to get rid of a lot of these constraints that are preventing all this from happening in terms of investing in the inner community. And we got to be able to encourage it by they want to give big multi-million dollar subsidies to Amazon, and to the other large Fortune 500. Why can't we do that?
But let me push back a little bit, Doctor. You just mentioned about Walmart having to pay off the unions to get into certain parts. I think you said Chicago, and that's understood. They shouldn't have had to pay off the unions, but shouldn't they really? I think what we are talking about here, we don't want Walmart wages in Chicago, right? We want real wages.
No, that's true, but you want a Walmart in there so you can go shopping.
Yeah, we sure do. We need them both. But I mean, how do we get them? I mean, what you just told me was a union corruption is what you just told me. If the union gets paid off, but the people are still making Walmart wages, that's a union payoff. That didn't help the people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the one thing we have to do with the inner cities too is we should be putting our junior colleges in there. So now they can get at least a decent education and that would provide them with a job, be it a dental technician or law enforcement or whatever the programs are for those inner cities. They certainly have a population large enough to even support one, to be honest.
Right.
So it's that kind of thing. We got to make it a community again. It's got to have all those things that makes the community, live.
A community, yes. Okay, Dr. Van Buskirk, I always get the name a little bit
you got it right.
Did I get it right? Great. Tell me a little bit about your book, Big Mike, Uncle Dan, and Me.
Yeah, Big Mike.
You have it with you?
Uncle Dan and Me. It's a story how I beat the New York State 20th century most corrupt political machine.
Tell me about it.
It's really a human interest story as well as a political story. It's about a community that was controlled by a machine for 40 years. I was born and brought up in it. I lived in it up until I was 28. I lived under a political machine. Our schools were in terrible shape. Teachers had to kick back to the machine. The infrastructure was falling apart. The parks were falling apart. The playgrounds were falling apart. But because of apathy and people would say, this is the way it is, so this is the way you got to live, and you got to accept this. And because of that apathy, that went on for 40 years until I came along. And I just couldn't believe that we were destined to have to live like this in really a totalitarian state in what we're supposed to be a democracy. I just wouldn't accept it. So it's a story about how I pushed back on the machine, organized the community, exposed their corruption. There's a lot of betrayal in it when you get into politics, violence. Actually, there was an attempt to kill me and my son. Back then you had a press that supported the machine because they got the illegal ads from the machine
and the kickbacks.
Just all kinds of corruption. In our community at that time, the Catholic Church, there were 90% Catholic, and the church then was totalitarian. And if you were a member of the church, you support the machine. And by the way, the machine supported the church schools, but not the public schools. So anyway, it's a good story for anybody that's interested in politics, interested in how a community could, after years of apathy, turn into action. I have a chapter on that, apathy to action, and all the forces you're going to be up against with the political power players, with the institutions, and the corruption, and the betrayal within your own organization that takes place once you get into power, and then once the reforms are put into effect and the reformers leave, what happens to the movement? So anyway, you can get it at Books A Million has the print copy right now, and so does Book Baby in their store. Amazon has the
e-copy.
Yeah, the e-copy.
E-book, yeah.
E-book because of the pandemic, there's such a demand for food and supplies that the warehouses don't have room now for
the books. Yeah,
but it'll be there in a few months. But you really enjoy reading it. It's everything that ever happens in politics. The good, the bad, the ugly, the tragic, and what have you.
Well, I'll have a link to that book in the blog post that's accompanying this interview. This interview should be going live pretty soon. Now, Dr. Van Buskirk question, and that is, what question didn't I ask you that you would have liked me to have asked?
Well, I wish I had more time to prepare for that one. I think the question I would like to ask you is, where do you think we'll be 5 years from now?
Well, 5 years from now, I am a very positive person. I think this is going to be our transitional year. Things are going to be horrendous. They're going to be terribly bad. I think good people like yourself and others are going to have good ideas to stand up to so that we can have some meat to put on the bones. And if we can get rid of that word that you speak about in your new book, apathy, and get more people engaged, I think things are going to get better. It's going to be a rough 2 years, but I am positive that the young people that I'm hanging with, the millennials, the young Gen Xers, and by God, those Gen Zs are going to pull us through.
Well, I agree with you. I'm an optimist too, and I think you're absolutely correct. And we've done this through the generations, by the way, over time, and it's a cycle, and it's unfortunate you have to wait 52 years. Happen, you know. I can only live so long.
Well, come on, Doc. You are seasoned, and you know what? You are still here, and you're still giving good advice. So, Dr. Paul Van Buskirk, thank you so kindly for having been with Politics Done Right, and keep up your great work, brother.
No, well, thank you very much.
I'm Egberto Willies, host of Politics Done Right, an independent news program. I post several news videos of interest every day. I ask you so kindly to subscribe to my channel, and please leave me some comments. Thank you very much.